What transforms an ordinary man into a monster? Is evil born, or is it forged in the fires of rejection, violence, and systemic failure? Tonight, we descend into the shadows of human nature to examine a case that shook France to its core. A story of a man who was given not one, not two, but three chances at redemption, and how each act of mercy became a stepping stone to unspeakable horror. This is the story of Jean-Claude Bonnel, known to the world as Le Chinois, the Chinese man, a nickname born of childhood cruelty that would echo through decades of bloodshed. But before we judge, before we condemn, we must ask ourselves, what role did we all play in creating this monster? Welcome to the Abyss. February 4th, 1953. Saigon. The First Indochina War rages, and in this crucible of conflict, Jean-Claude Bonnel draws his first breath. His father, French. His mother, Vietnamese. A child caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. Picture this. A family of 12 children, cramped in a refugee camp, then transplanted to the gray suburbs of Paris. Vitry-sur-Seine, a place where dreams come to die and hope withers like autumn leaves. But it wasn't poverty that carved the first scars into young Jean-Claude's soul. It was something far more insidious. Le Chinois, they screamed. The Chinese man. Day after day, playground after playground. The irony wasn't lost. He was Vietnamese, not Chinese. But to his tormentors, Asian was Asian. Different was different. And different was dangerous. Have you ever been truly alone? Not just physically, but existentially? When the very features of your face become a target, when your identity becomes a slur. This was Jean-Claude's childhood, a masterclass in systematic dehumanization. At home, his father's fist spoke the language of alcohol and rage. His mother, overwhelmed by 12 children, had no comfort to offer. The boy learned early that the world was a battlefield, and mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford. One, the flames that would consume more than just wood and wine. Two of Jean-Claude's brothers, 12 and 15 years old, burned alive in the family cellar. Officially ruled an accident, but Jean-Claude knew better. He always knew better. In that moment, watching his childhood home become a crematorium, something fundamental shifted. The last threads connecting Jean-Claude's innocence, they turned to ash. Fearing his father's wrath, the 17-year-old boy made a choice that would echo through decades. He ran. From school, from family, from any chance at normalcy. But you can't outrun what lives inside you. The question isn't whether the darkness will catch up. It's how many innocent lives will be claimed when it does. May 1971. Jean-Claude's first arrest, a crime so minor it vanished from official records. Like a whisper before the storm. Even attempted suicide couldn't silence the rage building inside him. The French Navy welcomed him in 1972. Structure, discipline, purpose. For a moment, perhaps, there was hope. But hope, like everything else in Jean-Claude's life, was fleeting. He deserted within months. Entered the Gang de la Banlieue, South Suburb Gang. For young men united by desperation and a hunger for something more than their gray existence could offer. They called him Bobon, a nickname that almost sounds affectionate. Almost. Think about it. Here was a boy who had never known belonging, suddenly finding brotherhood in criminality. The gang didn't see his Asian features as a weakness. They saw his desperation as strength. July 1973. A vacation. Such an innocent desire. To escape, to feel the sun on their faces, to pretend they were anything other than what they'd become. But freedom cost money, and money had to be taken. Picture an elderly woman, alone in her home, safe in her sanctuary. Then 3 shadows at her door and everything changes. They didn't mean to kill her. At least, that's what they told themselves. The gag was too tight. The bond's too restrictive. Death by suffocation while they ransack her life for vacation money. But here's what chills the soul. They didn't know she was dead. So confident in their restraint, they committed another robbery that very night, as if the universe was testing their capacity for evil, and they were eager to prove themselves worthy. The trial came in 1979. Premeditated murder reduced to involuntary manslaughter. The judge believed their story, that ignorance excused intention. Jean-Claude received 10 years. He served 8. June 30th, 1981. Freedom, the first taste of mercy from a system that would prove dangerously generous. 15 days after his release, Jean-Claude met her, a woman who saw past the criminal record, past the scars, past the darkness that clung to him like smoke. She felt pity for his tortured childhood. She saw potential for redemption. Love, it seemed, might be the antidote to a lifetime of poison. They had a child in 1982, a son. For a moment, we can imagine Jean-Claude holding this tiny life, wondering if he might finally break the cycle. But financial pressure has a way of awakening old demons. April 1983, a supermarket robbery, then a stolen tractor. The mask was slipping, but the witnesses were clear. The perpetrator was Asian. The police sketch looked exactly like Jean-Claude Bonnell. His girlfriend called it a slip, a momentary lapse in judgment. She begged for clemency. They married while he awaited trial, a prison wedding that spoke of love's blind faith in redemption. 7 years in prison. His second conviction. His second chance at rehabilitation. But when he emerged in April 1988, the world hadn't waited for his reformation. 2 children now, bills to pay, a criminal record that made honest work nearly impossible, the familiar pressure building like steam in a sealed container. What would you do if society had labeled you irredeemable? If every door to legitimate success had been slammed shut, what would you do? November 3rd, 1988. The Barclays Bank on the 16th arrondissement. For desperate men with nothing left to lose. But desperation, we're learning, is not Jean-Claude's only motivation anymore. There's something else now, a cold calculation, a willingness to escalate that speaks to a fundamental change in his nature. The robbery went wrong. Police arrived too soon. But instead of surrender, Jean-Claude chose war. Gunfire erupted in the heart of Paris. A police officer fell, critically wounded. The boy who once ran from confrontation now stood his ground with deadly force. 12 years in prison, his longest sentence yet. But by 1997, the system's mercy struck again. Early release, his third chance at redemption. Now, pay attention to this pattern. Each time the system showed mercy, Jean-Claude's crimes escalated. Each act of forgiveness was met with greater violence, as if compassion itself was seen as weakness to be exploited. He found work at a karaoke bar, as a cook in a nursing home. Normal jobs, normal life. But behind the facade of rehabilitation, Jean-Claude was collecting weapons. His girlfriend would later tell police about 3 guns he'd recently acquired, 3 instruments of death waiting for purpose. The question haunts us. Was rehabilitation ever truly possible? Or was Jean-Claude Bonnell already beyond redemption? A predator merely wearing a mask of reform? November 24th, 1998. The Printemps Haussmann department store, a temple of commerce in the heart of Paris. Inside, a currency exchange with minimal security. Easy prey for a man who had learned that society's mercy was his greatest weapon. 2 men entered, one in a yellow parka, one in dark clothing. Both armed, both determined. The heist was precision itself, threatening the security guard, forcing the clerk to fill bags with cash. 296,000 francs. Enough to fund whatever dreams of escape Jean-Claude might still harbor. But then came Emile Ferrari, a mechanic, a former bodyguard, a man who refused to be a bystander to evil. He followed the robbers, attempted to stop them for his heroism. He received a bullet to the head. Emile survived, but the cost was devastating. Memory loss, blindness in one eye, a life forever altered by one man's choice to pull the trigger. The investigation that followed revealed the disturbing evolution of Jean-Claude's criminal enterprise. Partners now included Mohammed Benamra, a career criminal with 41 years of combined sentences. Birds of feather, flocking together in their descent toward ultimate darkness. The evidence was overwhelming. Foreign currency in Jean-Claude's refrigerator, a Colt .45 hidden behind an air vent, witness identification, ballistics matches. Yet Jean-Claude maintained his innocence with the conviction of a man who had learned that the system's mercy was infinitely renewable. The trial became a farce of conflicting testimony and memory problems. Emile's damaged mind struggled to identify his attacker. Witnesses contradicted each other. In the end, reasonable doubt prevailed, and Jean-Claude walked free. Justice, it seemed, was as wounded as Emile Ferrari's shattered memory. October 6, 2001. The Bar Restaurant in Athos Mons. A family business run by Gildo and Maria Luisa Alves. Their 9-year-old daughter played nearby as evening customers enjoyed their drinks. Picture the scene, a quiet suburban establishment, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Safe, familiar. Then the door opens, and evil walks in wearing human faces. Albertina, the cleaning lady. Virginie, the waitress. Maria Luisa, the owner and mother. All three bound with electrical wire, executed with single shots to the head in the basement. Gildo, the father, shot in the hand and abdomen, left to die among vegetable crates and beer barrels. 7,000 francs. That's what 4 lives were worth to Jean-Claude Bonnel and his accomplices. But one life was spared, the 9-year-old daughter, hidden in a bathroom, forced to listen as her family was systematically murdered. She would later tell police about 3 men, 3 shadows of death who entered her world and destroyed everything she loved. The execution-style killings suggested professional assassins. But the chaotic aftermath, the small amount of money stolen, the unnecessary violence, this spoke to something more personal, more hateful. The child's testimony was devastating. She described one attacker with perfect clarity. Medium height, short brown hair, dark skin, and a scar on his right cheek. She would recognize him anywhere, she said. She had looked evil in the face and survived to tell the tale. What kind of darkness lives in a man who can execute 3 women and leave a child orphaned? What conversations took place in that basement as innocent people begged for their lives? October 16, 2001. Just 10 days after the Athos Mons massacre, evil struck again. This time, the target was Dr. Jean-Marc Perns and his family in Plessis-Gervais, a home invasion that quickly spiraled into a nightmare of violence and heroism. 5 armed men burst into the family home. The doctor, his wife, their daughter, all bound, forced to lie face down as their sanctuary was violated. But heroes come in unexpected forms. A niece visiting managed to hide and call for help. The police response was swift. 5 officers, including 33-year-old Patrick Leroux and 27-year-old Yves Meunier. Family men, protectors. They had no idea they were walking into a killing field. Patrick approached the house cautiously, peering through windows to assess the threat. He was spotted. The element of surprise was lost. But duty called louder than fear. The gunfight that followed was a testament to both heroism and evil. As the invaders tried to escape, they were confronted by brave officers who refused to let them disappear into the night. Patrick and Yves ran toward danger, not away from it. The cost of their courage was ultimate. Patrick died instantly, 3 bullets, ending a life dedicated to protecting others. Eve fought for his life in the hospital, but succumbed to his wounds. A third officer was critically injured but survived. The evidence left behind told a story of panic and violence. 9mm casings scattered across the garden, an empty Beretta magazine, a balaclava containing DNA, and most damning of all, a black glove bearing the genetic signature of Jean-Claude Bonnel. The third mercy of the French justice system had produced its deadliest consequence. 2 police officers dead, their families shattered. Their sacrifice reduced evidence in the case against a man who had been given every opportunity to choose a different path. The arrest came swiftly. DNA evidence is unforgiving. Unlike the courts that had repeatedly freed Jean-Claude, the black glove told its story in scientific certainty. Not only had Jean-Claude been there, but gunpowder residue proved he had been the shooter. His girlfriend's testimony revealed the full scope of his arsenal. 3 weapons, recently disposed of. One was a .380 caliber pistol, the same caliber used in the Athos Mons massacre. Another was a Beretta used to kill Patrick and Eve. The public outcry was unprecedented. Over 8,000 police officers marched in protest of Jean-Claude's previous releases. The judge who had granted his bail was dismissed. The case became a political earthquake, shaking the very foundations of French criminal justice. At trial, the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, ballistics, witness testimony. The surviving child from Athos Mons recognized his voice. The web of violence was finally unraveling. Jean-Claude's defense was predictable. Blame others, claim innocence, rage against the system that had created him. He spoke of childhood racism, of the nickname Le Chinois that had haunted him for decades, as if trauma could excuse the systematic execution of innocence. His accomplices told contradictory stories, each trying to minimize their own culpability. But the evidence spoke louder than their lies. February 1st, 2006. The verdict: life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 22 years. 7 dead bodies. 2 police officers. For innocent civilians. 1 traumatized child who would carry these memories forever. The price of mercy had been paid in blood. Jean-Claude Bonnel remains in prison today, eligible for parole in 2028. The likelihood of release? Virtually non-existent. His wife, incredibly, continued to defend him even after his conviction. She called him a wonderful husband and good father. Love, it seems, can be as blind as justice. The surviving child from Athos Mons grew up in the shadow of that terrible night. The families of Patrick Leroux and Eve Meunier continue to mourn their lost heroes. Emile Ferrari lives with permanent disabilities from a bullet that should never have been fired. But perhaps the most haunting question remains unanswered. How many lives could have been saved if the system had not shown mercy to a man who interpreted compassion as weakness? 3 times, Jean-Claude was released early. 3 times, he escalated his violence. Each act of judicial mercy became a death sentence for innocent people who had never heard his name. We created this monster not through malice, but through misguided compassion. We fed his sense of invincibility with our inability to see the pattern of escalation. We enabled his belief that consequences were negotiable. As we emerge from this journey into darkness, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil rarely announces itself with fanfare. It grows in the shadows of our good intentions, feeds on our desire to believe in redemption, and thrives on our reluctance to accept that some people are beyond saving. Jean-Claude Bonnel was shaped by racism, abuse, and systemic failures. But millions of people face such challenges without becoming monsters. At some point, we must acknowledge that choice trumps circumstance, that evil is not merely the absence of good, but an active force that must be confronted, not coddled. The nickname Le Chinois began as childhood cruelty. It ended as a byword for evil. But the transformation wasn't inevitable. It was enabled by a system that confused mercy with wisdom, compassion with intelligence. 7 people died because we chose to believe in the possibility of redemption over the reality of escalation. Their blood stains not just Jean-Claude's hands, but the hands of every person who chose hope over evidence, mercy over justice. In the end, the most terrifying monsters are not the ones born evil, but the ones we create through our own fatal compassion. The abyss, as they say, gazes also into us.